You know who you are?
Steven is my name.
Even Steven.
Will you say something, Steven?
Steeven R Media.
I'm the leader! I'm boss!
Everyone's scared, except my dad. But my brother Keith, he thinks that belonging to the gang would be really cool. He's gone bonkers. Gargantus is making everyone work for him, whether they like it or not. So far they haven't caught me, but I'm scared, Pro Stars. Please come soon.
From Steeven R Media, this is Growing Up Geek, Episode 2, The Death of Saturday Morning Cartoons. Hello and welcome to Growing Up Geek, the podcast that's learned to liquefy nostalgia and now has it pumping through its veins. I'm your host, my name is Steven, and I'll be your pilot on this temporal odyssey through the geek-centric cultural zeitgeist of my youth. From the 70s through the 80s and on into the 90s, we'll explore the movies, the music, the books, the comics, and the TV shows that shaped my childhood and made me, well, me. In our last episode, we explored the origins of Saturday morning cartoons, a phenomenon that took shape in the 1960s. This was a groundbreaking era when networks discovered the potential of creating dedicated programming blocks just for kids, transforming Saturday mornings into a beloved ritual of fun and adventure. Iconic shows like Space Ghost and the Jetsons from Hanna-Barbera, along with Jay Ward's Rocky and Bullwinkle, brought vibrant new worlds to life, introducing children to heroes, humor, and distant realms in a style that was simple, even innocent. For parents, it was a perfect solution, a safe, engaging space where their kids could be entertained for a few hours, allowing them to relax or tackle household chores. However, as the decade progressed, a new conversation began. Parents started voicing concerns over the level of violence depicted in some of these cartoons, and questions arose about the kind of messages these shows were sending. Many began to worry that these animated battles, even in the lighthearted shows, might be impacting young viewers in ways that weren't entirely positive. In response to this growing sentiment, networks made a pivot in the 1970s, giving rise to a new era of Saturday morning programming that was not only entertaining, but also socially conscious. The 70s became an era of cartoons with a message, as networks leaned into educational and morally driven content. Hanna-Barbera continued to dominate, but new series like Scooby-Doo, Josie and the Pussycats, and Fat Albert introduced themes of friendship, problem-solving, and acceptance. Shows like The Super Friends and Schoolhouse Rock brought social awareness into children's lives, teaching values like teamwork, environmental responsibility, and civic duty. These cartoons retained their fun and excitement, but began subtly instilling values that spoke to the concerns of parents and the larger culture of the time. The result was a blend of entertainment and education that allowed kids to enjoy their Saturday mornings while absorbing lessons on empathy, responsibility, and social awareness. And then the 1980s crashed onto the scene. It was a decade of excess, and that sense of bigger, brighter, and louder translated directly into Saturday morning programming. With deregulation opening the door for more advertising aimed at kids, Saturday mornings transformed from a beloved tradition into a prime opportunity for big business. The cartoons of the 80s were now vehicles to sell toys and products, from G.I. Joe to Transformers, He-Man, and Gem. Though these shows weren't exclusive to Saturday mornings, their massive success showed just how powerful the kids' market had become. Saturday mornings themselves became increasingly commercialized, with every character on screen potentially becoming an action figure, lunchbox, or board game. This was peak Reagan-era capitalism, and in many ways, the cartoons kids loved became extensions of corporate marketing strategies. But for those of us who grew up in this era, those toy-driven shows were the backdrop of our childhoods, And while the motivations may have been driven by profit, the impact on our imaginations was just as powerful. So here we are at the end of a decade defined by neon colors, action-packed cartoons, and an unapologetic embrace of commercialism. The 80s had redefined Saturday morning cartoons, but as we head into the 90s, change was in the air. Cable television was becoming a household staple, and new channels like Nickelodeon and the Cartoon Network started offering kids access to cartoons any time of day. Weekday afternoon cartoon blocks on networks like Fox Kids and the Disney Afternoon brought even more options. Saturday mornings were no longer the only time kids could watch their favorite shows. So settle in, folks, as we dive into the 1990s, a decade where the unique charm of Saturday mornings began to fade. But even as the tradition started to shift, a few final iconic shows, clever innovations, and unforgettable characters kept the Saturday morning magic alive. Let's explore how cartoons adapted to the changing landscape, what new trends took shape, and which shows became timeless favorites as we enter the next chapter of Saturday morning cartoons. The 1990s marked a dramatic shift in the world of Saturday morning cartoons, driven by both technological advances and cultural changes that redefined the landscape of children's television. As cable TV emerged and gained popularity, networks like Nickelodeon, the Cartoon Network, and even the Disney Channel began offering 24/7 access to animated programming. This new availability began to challenge the once sacred ritual of Saturday morning cartoons. Now kids didn't have to wait for the weekend to get their fix. Cartoons were always just a channel flip away. But these cable networks didn't just offer constant access to cartoons. They also introduced dedicated programming blocks that carved out special viewing times, drawing in loyal young audiences. In 1992, Nickelodeon launched its famous Saturday night lineup, Snick, with shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Clarissa Explains It All, which catered to older kids and preteens. In 1997, the Cartoon Network set the stage for an action-packed era with Toonami, a block that brought anime to the mainstream and forever changed how American kids saw cartoons. Toonami offered shows like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, which pulled kids in with continuous story arcs, cliffhangers, and serialized storytelling that left them wanting more. These blocks became cultural touchstones in their own right, and combined with the ability to watch cartoons around the clock, they chipped away at the unique appeal of Saturday morning programming. But despite this, Saturday morning still held a special place in the hearts of many kids. What made the 90s unique was the rise of creator-driven animation, a shift from the heavily commercialized content of the 80s to shows that focused on storytelling, character development, and often pushing the boundaries of what cartoons could be. The 90s were defined by experimentation, allowing animators and writers to take greater creative control, resulting in some of the most memorable and influential cartoons of all time. One defining trend of the 90s was the wave of cartoons adapted from movies. This was both a nostalgic callback and a way for studios to capitalize on familiar franchises. Shows like Beetlejuice, based on the 1988 Tim Burton film, brought the dark, quirky humor of the ghostly bio-exorcist to Saturday morning viewers, adapting Burton's unique style into something kid-friendly while still retaining an edge that was rare for children's animation.
Willpower?
That little voice inside your head that tells you when you're doing something wrong.
I never do anything wrong. Whoa. I might have spun the wrong way, though.
This trend continued with adaptations of film classics like Back to the Future, The Little Mermaid, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and Fievel's American Tales, the latter of which expanded the adventures of Fievel Mousekewitz from An American Tale. These shows bridged the cinematic world to television in a way that allowed kids to keep experiencing the magic of these films. The 90s also saw some unexpected movie choices reimagined for young audiences. Shows like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and The Mask adapted movies with decidedly odd premises and even darker or more mature humor into family-friendly cartoons. It was part of the 90s ethos, showing kids something a bit out of the box and embracing weirdness while remaining playful.
Hey kids, what time is it? Killer Tomatoes time! So, what shall it be this week,
Then came Batman the Animated Series, which redefined what animated superhero shows and eventually Saturday morning cartoons could be. When it premiered on Fox in 1992, it aired on weekday afternoons, captivating young audiences with a tone and visual style that had never been seen before in children's animation. Its dark film noir aesthetic and mature, complex storylines instantly set it apart. The series became such a hit that Fox executives quickly ordered a second season while the first was still airing. The second season introduced the Adventures of Batman and Robin title, giving Robin a more prominent role. And in 1994, the show shifted to Saturday mornings, solidifying its legacy as a staple of the weekend lineup. This wasn't just a show about superheroes. It was a game changer for the entire medium. The characters were deeply layered with motivations and backstories that appealed to both kids and adults. One of the most memorable episodes, Heart of Ice, transformed Mr. Freeze from a simple villain into a tragic figure driven by loss and vengeance. The Emmy Award-winning episode showcased a level of storytelling that explored genuine emotion and human pain, proving that animated shows could convey depth and maturity. Batman the Animated Series set a new standard, inspiring future shows to aim higher and to trust that young audiences could handle and appreciate more sophisticated themes.
Think of it, Batman. To never again walk on a summer's day with a hot wind in your face and a warm hand to hold. Oh yes, I'd kill for that.
X-Men the Animated Series also took Saturday morning cartoons to new depths, exploring social themes through the lens of a superhero team. The series didn't shy away from complex topics, including prejudice, self-doubt, and personal sacrifice, mirroring the real-life issues of discrimination and acceptance. The Dark Phoenix saga was certainly memorable, an adaptation of a popular comic book storyline that delved into the psychological struggles of Jean Grey as she battled with the powerful Phoenix entity within her. The storyline introduced children to the idea that good and evil could be ambiguous, that even heroes could wrestle with their darker sides. X-Men brought an emotional weight to superhero storytelling that had rarely been seen in American animation before.
Tell us about the Phoenix, Jean. What does she want now that the M-Cron crystal is safe?
Phoenix hungers. Yes, I hunger.
Meanwhile, Spider-Man, the animated series, tackled similar themes, using Peter Parker's struggles to balance superhero duties with his personal life. Episodes explored betrayal, responsibility, and the consequences of one's actions. Like in the Alien costume arc, where Spider-Man's bond with the symbiote tested his resolve and morals.
I give up. Come on. You're supposed to be the good guy. You can't do this. Why not? I have the power.
These weren't just simple stories about good versus evil. They were introspective, presenting superheroes as vulnerable, relatable characters who made mistakes, faced heartbreak, and struggled with inner demons. This resonated deeply with viewers and helped to elevate the show's status from mere entertainment to something much more profound. At the same time, humor-driven animation exploded with shows like the Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. These weren't simple joke machines. They were layered with clever pop culture references and wit that resonated with both kids and their parents. Building on the comedy legacy of the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes animated theatrical shorts, the Animaniacs brought in sketches that ranged from slapstick to socio-political satire, with characters like the Warner siblings and parodies like Goodfeathers providing sharp, satirical commentaries on Hollywood and politics.
Can you conjugate?
Who, me? I've never even kissed a girl.
No, it's easy. I'll conjugate with you.
Good night, everybody.
Pinky and the Brain spun off from the Animaniacs with its own storyline about a pair of lab mice constantly scheming to take over the world in hilariously futile ways. And of course, one can't talk about the 90s without mentioning the cultural juggernaut that was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Heroes in a half shell, turtle power.
Though it had begun its reign in the late 80s, the Turtles continued to dominate well into the 90s, anchoring the Saturday morning lineup for years. Kids were still clamoring for the toys, the cereal, and the video games that spun out of the franchise's immense popularity. But the Turtles also represented the continued commercialization of children's entertainment, albeit with the grittier, edgier vibe that resonated with the times.
Excuse me, Mr. News Vendor dude, but what happened to the new issue of Bugman?
Bugman? They don't publish it no more.
What? But it's the greatest comic book of all time.
So go complain to the publisher. Now move along, this ain't no library.
Beyond the realms of superheroes, the 90s also brought some original, quirky concepts to Saturday morning. Bobby's World, created by comedian Howie Mandel, followed a young boy navigating everyday situations with a wildly imaginative mind. The show's humor was accessible to kids, but often layered with a sense of wonder and confusion about adult life that resonated with parents as well. Meanwhile, the Pirates of Darkwater introduced a dark, fantasy-inspired storyline with a pirate theme and an ecological twist, mixing high seas adventures with an environmental message about pollution. And of course, Conan and the Young Warriors, an adaptation inspired by the classic sword and sorcery character Conan the Barbarian, brought fantasy themes to Saturday mornings.
Together, battling the forces of evil, they are Conan and the Young Warriors.
While the show didn't match the darker tone of Robert E. Howard's original works, it introduced young viewers to a world of epic quests and battles, which might have sparked an interest in fantasy and adventure stories.
With a weapon such as this, I'd never lose a battle.
Don't be so sure. A good weapon is no substitute for good strategy.
In this world, Conan, sometimes a good weapon is the only strategy.
The 90s also ushered in an era where celebrities made their way into Saturday morning cartoons. Pro Stars, for instance, was a curious blend of sports and superhero adventure, featuring animated versions of sports icons Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, and Bo Jackson saving the world.
Bo knows bad guys, and that Gargantus needs to be taught a lesson. Pro Star style.
While the show didn't last long, it reflected the 90s obsession with celebrity culture and larger-than-life personalities. And then there was the Weird Al Show in 1997, a unique, live-action addition to the Saturday lineup that featured music, bizarre skits, and a dose of Weird Al Yankovic's offbeat humor.
Many things grow in dirt, like carrots. Carrots are good to eat, but you should never eat dirt. It doesn't taste very good, and you might get dirt on your uvula.
Alongside these American-made shows, the 90s also introduced American kids to the world of anime. The rise of shows like Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, and Sailor Moon on Saturday mornings was part of a broader cultural exchange that brought Japanese animation into the mainstream. These shows broke the mold with their serialized storytelling, introducing a generation of viewers to long-form narratives and character development that stretched over entire seasons, something relatively rare in Western animation at the time. Pokemon in particular became a cultural phenomenon with its trading card games, video games, and endless merchandise, turning it into a multi-billion-dollar franchise that has endured to this day.
That's your Pokemon?
Pikachu.
Yeah, that's my Pokemon.
The 90s also catered to kids' love for the supernatural and science fiction, with shows like Eek the Cat mixing humor with sci-fi and fantasy elements, while Mighty Morphin Power Rangers combined live-action sequences with Japanese footage, a blend of fantasy, martial arts, and superhero adventure that became an international sensation.
Finster! Oh, Finster!
Yes, oh, nasty one. I'm working on a marvelous monster that eats cars and smells like a fish.
Never mind that. Make me a musical monster that will mesmerize those pathetic Power Rangers and bring them to their knees.
Meanwhile, Gargoyles, a dark, myth-inspired show, gained a cult following for its mature storylines and complex characters, standing out as a show that dared to be serious and gritty.
A gargoyle doesn't whine. He roars!
But all of these cultural developments didn't happen in a vacuum. Much like in the 80s, the 90s were shaped by political and economic changes, and the shifting tone of the cartoons reflected the changing world around them. As the optimism of the Reagan era gave way to the more cynical tone of the 90s, cartoons became a mirror of the darker, more complex issues people were grappling with. The economy was shifting, and so was the entertainment industry. The rise of cable television and the proliferation of new networks meant that the days of networks dominating Saturday mornings were outnumbered. The bright, colorful, and often simplistic shows of the 80s were gradually replaced by the more gritty, realistic stories that resonated with the angsty Gen X and millennial kids of the time. Cable TV, especially Nickelodeon, capitalized on this cultural shift, positioning itself as the network for kids who wanted something different. Shows like Doug, Rugrats, and Hey Arnold focused more on the emotional and social lives of kids, offering viewers a grounded, relatable take on childhood. These shows didn't shy away from addressing real-world problems such as bullying, family dynamics, and self-identity. Hey Arnold tackled gentrification, homelessness, and mental health in ways that were subtle but impactful.
We can rebuild the cages and sweep up. Your birds will come back.
Of course they'll come back. They're birds. I trust them. I understand them. It's people I don't understand. You see, Arnold, it's time for me to leave here. Some people are meant to be with people, and others, like me, are just different.
In many ways, these cartoons were a response to the excess and commercialization of the 80s. They were more thoughtful, more introspective, and at times, more critical of the world in which they existed. But as much as the 90s were defined by creator-driven, story-focused cartoons, there was still a strong undercurrent of commercialization, especially with the rise of after-school cartoon blocks and cable networks vying for the attention of young viewers. The weekday cartoon blocks, combined with 24/7 cable channels like the Cartoon Network, meant that kids no longer had to wait until Saturday mornings to watch their favorite shows. Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo became breakout hits, combining slapstick humor with a retro, almost subversive vibe. These shows were fun.
Dexter? What's my name? Omelette de fromage. That's all you can say! That's all you can say! That's all you can say! That's all you can say!
But they were also packed with merchandise opportunities, from toys to t-shirts, keeping alive the commercialization that had dominated in the previous decade. By the late 90s, the traditional Saturday morning cartoon block was starting to show signs of decline. The rise of cable, video games, and even the internet began to chip away at the dominance of network television. Kids were no longer beholden to a specific time slot to watch their favorite shows. They could tune in whenever they wanted. And with networks like Nickelodeon and the Cartoon Network leading the charge, it became clear that Saturday mornings were no longer the cornerstone of children's entertainment. Growing Up Geek will be back after these messages. Are you looking for a podcast that dives into the very beginnings of the Man of Steel? Then check out the Superman Super Show. My name is Steven, and along with Ed Moore, we're just a couple of guys separated by 1,000 miles of geography who like to read comics. Now, we don't claim to be experts on Superman or the golden age of comics, but we're on a mission to read every single Superman story from his earliest adventures, one comic book at a time. And each episode will take you back to the golden age where Superman's journey began. From his first leaps over tall buildings to battling mad scientists and mobsters, we break down every story, sharing our thoughts, insights, and laughs along the way. New episodes drop every 2 weeks. So whether you're a longtime Superman fan or just curious about his roots, we invite you to join us on this incredible journey through comic book history. Find the Superman Super Show wherever you listen to podcasts and start exploring the golden age of Superman with us today. And now back to Growing Up Geek. By the early 2000s, the golden era of Saturday morning cartoons was fading as the TV landscape underwent seismic shifts. Anime, which had made a strong impact in the 90s, continued its rise into the 2000s. Shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Naruto, and One Piece captivated young audiences, bringing fresh perspectives to American TV screens. With distinct animation styles, serialized storytelling, and emotional depth, anime provided a sense of narrative continuity and complex character development that felt revolutionary.
If we don't play the Egyptian god card this turn, we're gonna lose the duel. And we've got to win to save the world. We have to draw it now.
Yes, we must. The heart of the cards will guide us. Now let's do this!
Kids who were already familiar with Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z found themselves pulled into these new, expansive anime worlds, which introduced a depth of storytelling rarely seen in Western Saturday morning offerings. Meanwhile, American animation was also innovating as the nature of Saturday morning cartoons continued to evolve, reflecting changing tastes, technologies, and the competitive pressures from cable and online platforms. Some shows embraced the action-adventure model with high stakes and serialized plots, like Jackie Chan Adventures and X-Men Evolution, which combined martial arts action and classic superhero storylines with fresh animation styles. Jackie Chan Adventures, for instance, wasn't just another action show. It introduced kids to a unique blend of martial arts and mystical elements inspired by Chinese culture, adding a layer of educational insight alongside its thrilling plots.
Give us a break, Chan. We're not even working for any forces of darkness this week.
Yeah, we're on vacation.
Can't you let us have just one little priceless statue?
The Burmese raccoon belongs in a museum.
Well, Ratso and Chow here are gonna put you where you belong, in a hospital.
X-Men Evolution did something similar by reimagining classic Marvel characters as teenagers dealing with both superpowers and the challenges of high school. A double-edged sword that many young viewers could relate to.
You're kidding, right?
You heard me. I want to be an X-Men. I'm serious.
Yeah, right. And I want to be the Tooth Fairy.
This show, along with others like Static Shock and Justice League, carried forward the legacy of the 90s Batman the Animated Series, blending superhero action with thoughtful exploration of real-world issues. Static Shock in particular didn't shy away from complex topics like gun violence and racism, presenting them with a sincerity that was unprecedented for a Saturday morning lineup.
You feeling better, son?
A little. Thanks for kicking it with me last night, Pops. I still don't get how a guy like Richie has a father like that.
That's a question that even Richie's father can't answer. That kind of hate feeds on itself. But Richie's made up his own mind about who to like. He's broken his father's cycle of intolerance.
In parallel, series like Rescue Heroes, Global Response Team, and Crypto the Superdog brought a more lighthearted or instructive approach to children's programming. While Rescue Heroes focused on teamwork and safety in crisis situations, Crypto the Superdog offered young viewers an accessible entry point to the world of superheroes, this time through the eyes of Superman's beloved pet. This gentle slice-of-life storytelling showed how children's programming was adapting to appeal to both younger audiences and parents who appreciated the moral themes embedded in these shows.
You know, being a superhero, I get called away on missions all the time. I'd need some help raising him. Maybe if he could stay here.
No problem!
Great. See you around, Crypto. Oh, and good job, Superdog.
As we move through the decade, shows like Teen Titans and The Batman introduced a darker tone and more complex narratives, signaling a shift toward a blend of teen angst and mature themes. Teen Titans, with its mix of humor, character development, and overarching story arcs, resonated deeply with viewers. It took advantage of the era's growing appreciation for anime and manga, which was also reflected in other shows that brought an anime-inspired art style and pacing to American animation.
Starfire?
Going somewhere?
I am leaving for Tamaran.
And you're taking all your stuff because...
I am not ever coming back.
What? Starfire, what's wrong?
Nothing is wrong. I am getting married.
What?
By the mid-2000s, nostalgia was a powerful factor. Networks rebooted old favorites, but with a twist, as seen in G.I. Joe Sigma 6 and Transformers Robots in Disguise. These reboots often incorporated new animation techniques and updated storylines to appeal to both new viewers and adults who grew up with these franchises. This trend reflected the industry's new strategy, balancing innovation with nostalgia to capture the attention of both kids and their parents.
Duke and his team now have a power stone! I am not a happy commander! Before I have you all replaced, I'm giving you one last chance to serve me!
For the latter half of the 2000s and into the 2010s, cartoons like The Spectacular Spider-Man and What's New Scooby-Doo stayed close to their roots, but adapted to the sensibilities of the time. The Spectacular Spider-Man managed to reinvigorate the classic Marvel character with storytelling that balanced lighthearted humor and the emotional weight of Peter Parker's double life. Meanwhile, What's New Scooby-Doo kept the mystery-solving formula, but introduced modern settings and cultural references, proving that even familiar characters could stay relevant with a few clever updates.
Wow, this place is pretty impressive.
It should be. I built it myself. Best security system there is. Nothing happens in this mall without me knowing about it.
You mean like toys coming to life?
As the 2010s arrived, Saturday morning cartoons faced intense competition from streaming platforms. Yet, some networks continued to experiment with original content. The Looney Tunes show and Lunatics Unleashed, for example, tried to modernize Warner Brothers' classic characters. The Looney Tunes show was a fascinating departure from slapstick comedy, setting iconic characters like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck in a sitcom-like environment. Meanwhile, Lunatics Unleashed pushed the boundaries even further, reimagining the beloved Looney Tunes characters as futuristic superheroes, a bold experiment that highlighted a decade's appetite for reimaginings.
Yesterday you were calling yourself Super Duper Duck. Yeah, well, it wasn't quite rolling off the tongue. Besides, I need a name that'll fit on the costume. How about Duck? Very funny.
As this period came to a close, the desire for continuity and larger cinematic universes permeated children's programming. Kids were drawn to shows like The Spectacular Spider-Man and The Batman, which didn't just present isolated adventures, but built worlds and emotional stakes over time, setting a new standard for animation in the era of streaming and on-demand viewing. However, despite the innovations, the Saturday morning cartoon block was starting to decline. Technology was a significant driver of this change. Cable TV channels like the Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and the Disney Channel had been challenging the dominance of Saturday mornings throughout the 90s. But by the early 2000s, they were widely accessible in American households. Kids no longer needed to wait for Saturday morning. Cartoons were now available 24/7. New devices like DVRs and TiVo gave families even more control, allowing them to record and watch shows whenever they wanted, gradually rendering the must-watch Saturday morning time slot obsolete. The decline wasn't solely due to technology, though. Regulatory shifts played a major role as well. The Children's Television Act of 1990 had already begun to affect programming by mandating that broadcasters dedicate a portion of their airtime to educational content. Initially, networks found a way around these regulations by labeling certain light informational cartoons as educational. However, in the early 2000s, the FCC started to enforce stricter rules, requiring networks to air genuinely educational programming. As a result, networks like NBC, CBS, and Fox began phasing out their cartoon blocks, filling those slots with live-action, educational shows instead. This regulatory pressure contributed to a major transformation in children's programming. The FCC's stricter enforcement of these rules led networks to devote more time to educational programming, causing a shift away from traditional cartoons. By the 2010s, Saturday morning cartoon blocks had nearly disappeared. The final blow came in 2014 when the CW, the last major network still airing Saturday morning cartoons, replaced its animated lineup with a block of live-action, educational programming produced by Litton Entertainment. The CW had previously aired cartoons under its Vortex banner, which included shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Sonic X. But in October of that year, the network announced that it would be switching entirely to educational content, effectively closing the chapter on Saturday morning cartoons after more than 5 decades.
The Washington Post reports that this Saturday morning marked the first time that no cartoons aired on an American broadcast channel. The CW, which was the last channel still showing cartoons, pulled the plug.
This shift also reflected larger societal changes. By the 2010s, the way people consumed media had transformed entirely. Streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and eventually Disney Plus and HBO Max began to dominate the market, offering viewers the chance to watch anything at any time. For kids, this meant they could binge entire seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender, SpongeBob SquarePants, or new animated series without waiting for a specific time slot. The concept of waiting for cartoons to air on Saturday mornings had become a relic of the past. Culturally, The 2000s and 2010s marked the rise of on-demand content and increasing corporatization of children's media. While the 80s had already made entertainment a commercial powerhouse, the 2000s took it further, embedding kids' programming with multi-platform media empires. Shows were no longer just vehicles for toy sales. They were integral to larger franchises that included movies, video games, and merchandise. Franchises like Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and G.I. Joe were rebooted with both new audiences and nostalgic adults in mind, aiming to bridge generational gaps in fandom. This all-encompassing media strategy peaked with the success of comic book franchises, especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which brought superheroes into mainstream global culture. Politically, the landscape of the 2000s and 2010s also played a role in shaping the content of children's programming. The aftermath of 9/11, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the 2008 financial crisis all contributed to a growing sense of cynicism and complexity in the culture. This shift was reflected in the more mature themes seen in animated shows for older audiences, such as Avatar: The Last Airbender, which dealt with themes of war, genocide, and redemption, as well as The Legend of Korra, which explored issues like class struggle and authoritarianism.
Your destiny. This is incredible. You will be involved in a great battle. An awesome conflict between the forces of good and evil. A battle whose outcome will determine the fate of the whole world.
Yeah, I knew that already. But did it say anything about a girl?
The lighter, more whimsical cartoons of the 80s and early 90s gave way to narratives that were more reflective of a world in flux. By the mid-2010s, the era of Saturday morning cartoons had officially come to an end, but their legacy lived on. Streaming services began to resurrect many of the classic shows from the 80s and 90s, allowing new generations of kids to experience the magic of shows like DuckTales, The Smurfs, and the X-Men. At the same time, new animated shows like Adventure Time, Steven Universe, and Gravity Falls continued to push the boundaries of what children's programming could be, blending humor, heart, and social commentary in ways that would have been unthinkable in earlier decades.
When a gem is made, it's for a reason. They burst out of the ground already knowing what they're supposed to be, and then that's what they are. Forever. But you're supposed to change. You're never the same, even moment to moment. You're allowed and expected to invent who you are. What an incredible power. The ability to grow up.
The end of Saturday morning cartoons signaled more than just the end of a beloved childhood ritual. It marked the end of a shared cultural experience. For decades, kids had woken up on Saturday mornings, gathered around the TV with a bowl of cereal, and collectively tuned in to watch their favorite characters battle villains, solve mysteries, or embark on adventures. This ritual created a sense of unity, a shared bond between kids across the country who were all watching the same shows at the same time. In the era of streaming and on-demand content, that kind of collective experience is harder to come by. But even though Saturday morning cartoons are no longer a staple of network TV, their influence is undeniable. They shaped the childhoods of millions of kids, introduced us to characters and stories that we still cherish today, and in many ways, set the stage for the modern world of animation. So while the cartoon blocks may be gone, the spirit of Saturday mornings, the joy, the creativity, the sense of wonder, lives on in the hearts of those who experienced it. Growing Up Geek will be back after these messages. According to the latest report from falsifiedstats.com, there are currently 12 million active comic book podcasts clogging up the internet superhighway, and 2.3 million new comic book podcasts are being created every single day. If you're looking for something a little different, then let me tell you about Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow. Mike travels the globe and visits comic shops along the way, talking to the owners or really just whomever happens to be minding the store that day. And it's through these conversations that you'll meet some wonderful people and learn how comic shops are run in places like Murfreesboro, Illinois, and Liverpool, New South Wales, Australia. So check out Mike's Comic Shop Roadshow, a truly unique comic book podcast among billions of the same old, same old. Find it now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Mike, and I approve this message.
And now back to Growing Up Geek. Saturday morning cartoons were a massive part of my life as I was growing up geek. As I mentioned in the previous episode, I spent my childhood and my teenage years in the 1980s. I went from 7 to 17, a golden age for Saturday morning TV. Back then, Saturday morning wasn't just a time slot, it was a ritual. A few precious hours of animated magic before real life and weekend chores kicked in. One of the most exciting moments each year came just before the new TV season started, when the three major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, would air primetime specials to showcase their upcoming Saturday morning lineups. These half-hour or hour-long programs were basically televised sneak peeks designed to hype kids like me for what was to come. With hosts often pulled from popular sitcoms or other TV shows of the time, these specials turned our living rooms into mini preview theaters. They'd feature clips, teasers, and maybe a few jokes from the host, all designed to build the suspense. For a kid, it was almost like having a red carpet reveal of the season's biggest animated stars. The build-up wasn't limited to television either. Throughout the 80s, networks took out full-page ads in comic books to promote the new season of cartoons. I can remember flipping through issues of Spider-Man or G.I. Joe and seeing these vibrant ads. Each was a colorful spread showcasing the main characters, along with exaggerated taglines promising the best cartoon lineups yet. Sometimes they featured superheroes or even anthropomorphic animals bursting out of the page, and I'd study every detail, deciding which shows had the most can't-miss potential. The combination of these primetime specials and the comic book ads gave Saturday mornings a level of anticipation that went beyond just turning on the TV. It was like getting the Sears Wish Book catalog in the mail, a yearly ritual where you'd pore over the newest toys, circling the ones you dreamed of having. Only with cartoons, there's no need to save up any money. All you needed was a good spot on the couch and a remote. And while I didn't exactly mark up my TV screen, I would grab the latest issue of TV Guide and make my notes, circling the shows I wanted to catch and planning my Saturday mornings with the same care some people put into planning vacations. These previews made the wait almost as fun as the shows themselves. For weeks leading up to the season premiere, the excitement would build, and by the time Saturday morning rolled around, I'd be more than ready to dive into whatever new animated adventures awaited. Those preview specials and ads were like signposts, leading us into a season filled with fresh characters, new worlds, and more unforgettable memories. And it was all part of what made Saturday mornings an unmissable experience week after week. Looking back, it's clear that Saturday morning cartoons were more than just colorful characters and catchy theme songs. They were a cultural phenomenon that shaped a generation. From the 70s and 80s, when we woke up to worlds filled with superheroes, lovable creatures, and epic battles of good versus evil, to the 90s and beyond, where deeper stories and serialized narratives began to change the landscape of children's television. Saturday mornings evolved alongside us. What started as a few hours of simple fun became an essential part of childhood for millions, with each generation bringing its own touch of innovation, commercial influence, and storytelling magic. For many of us, those cartoons weren't just an escape. They were a weekly ritual, a way to bond with siblings, friends, and even our parents, who might join us for a bit of Scooby-Doo or the Smurfs. Saturday mornings represented a time to dive into a world free from homework, free from chores, a world that felt boundless in its imagination and promise. And as advertisers and networks caught on, the magical space was infused with commercialism and brand loyalty, introducing us to characters who would live on in our toy chests, lunchboxes, and bedrooms. In the 80s, these cartoons became intricately tied to consumer culture. Companies realized that kids weren't just watching cartoons, they were watching heroes they wanted to own in action figure form. This era saw cartoons and toys evolve together, creating a new kind of media synergy that extended into nearly every part of children's lives. This level of commercialization sparked criticism, but it's hard to deny that it also gave us a shared universe of beloved characters that defined our playtime and creativity. As we moved into the 90s, the landscape shifted again. Anime and serialized storytelling introduced kids to complex characters and ongoing narratives. And cable channels began offering 24/7 access to cartoons. Saturday morning was still special, but it was no longer the exclusive window for animated adventure. Shows grew up with us, touching on darker themes and more intricate storylines, while new genres and styles pushed the boundaries of what kids' entertainment could be. By the time we reached the 2000s and 2010s, Saturday morning cartoons had largely faded away, replaced by streaming services, on-demand programming, and educational mandates that prioritize live action over animation. But even though Saturday morning cartoons are no longer a staple, their influence continues to resonate. The impact of those stories, characters, and weekly traditions can still be felt today in the way we consume media. Today's animation, from Adventure Time to Steven Universe, has embraced the lessons learned from decades of storytelling innovation and emotional depth. We now live in a time where animated series aren't just for kids, they're for everyone, and they often tackle complex themes that resonate with audiences of all ages. The magic, imagination, and creativity of Saturday morning lives on, reminding us of a time when all we needed was a bowl of cereal, a cozy spot on the couch, and a few hours to dive into worlds filled with superheroes, talking animals, and everything in between. So while the era of Saturday morning cartoons may have ended, their spirit lives on. It's in the shared nostalgia that brings us back to those simpler days, in the joy we feel when revisiting these old shows, and in the legacy they left behind for new generations of creators and fans. They may no longer dominate our Saturday mornings, but they will always hold a special place in our hearts, a cherished reminder of the creativity and adventure that defined our childhoods. What were some of my favorite Saturday morning cartoons? Don't worry, we're going to get to that. On the next episode of Growing Up Geek, I'm joined by fellow podcaster and one half of the Flip City podcast, Wayne Cordova, and we are going to each count down our top 5 Saturday morning cartoons and just generally reminisce on those golden days of animated glory. Join us as we revisit the shows that shaped our Saturday mornings while we were each growing up geek. Trust me, folks, you don't want to miss this nostalgic showdown. Until then, what's left to say except, well, bye. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Growing Up Geek. Questions and comments can be directed to growingupgeekpodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can help to boost our presence online by leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. I also invite you to join our subscription program, Steeven R Beyond, and in return, you'll get episodes of Growing Up Geek early and ad-free. Check out the link in the show notes, or just go to growingupgeekpodcast.com to sign up today. Growing Up Geek is a presentation of Steeven R Media. For more nerdy content hosted by me, check out SteevenRelse.com.
I just don't think I can move through life knowing that a guy named Steven did this to me.
How could you let this happen, Steven?
Your podcast sucks.
Hail to the king, baby.
Steven! Thank God. I had a horrible feeling I was going to be the only one here.